My name is Lupita Murillo-Tenen, and I am a full-time professor of photography at the Collin College Preston Ridge campus in Frisco, Texas. My approach to judging is related to aesthetics. I tend to choose images that stand out and are executed beautifully. Although there's no argument that photography is quite subjective and everyone will have a different opinion on what constitutes a good photograph. As an educator, I do have 20 years of experience in looking at photographs. I chose images that stayed away from cliches. In other words, if there were several predictable images, I tended to gravitate towards the ones that were more unique. Color makes a huge difference, the color of the subject, but more importantly, the color of light, which can make a dramatic difference in how the mood of a subject is represented. I always look for great light. Beginners. What's Inside received a score of 7. This was the lowest score, not because it's a terrible image, but because I thought the entrance theme was a little lost. The main subjects are the two little boys, and the door seems detached and not part of the composition. And the photographer is also too far away from the main subjects. To improve this image, I might have considered a different point of view, moved in closer, or had the main subjects somehow interacting with the entrance. Entrance to Mystery received a score of 10. While the texture of the door is wonderful, I thought the image was a little bit too predictable. This would be the image that everyone first thinks of when I assign to a class, or if I were to assign this topic to a class. I would try to think of something that makes it a little more unique, whether that be the lighting or maybe adding another element to the composition. Entrance to Jail, Portal to Freedom received a score of 10. I really like the composition of this image, but the lighting is a bit too harsh. I would have taken it at a different time of day or made it a little bit more ominous by waiting until twilight or perhaps a stormy day. A Young Visitor received a score of 11. While I like the composition and the lighting, I thought the sun flare is almost too much. I would have less flare or avoided it altogether. It's still a great image without it. The Cave received a score of 13 and an honorable mention. The image is by Brenda Armstrong. This too is a great composition. The only drawback is the time of day is not ideal. It does have a harsh sun, which makes it seem a little bit more ordinary, even though it's such a great location. I would have waited for a different time of the day, perhaps later when the sun is setting. However, I thought the colors looked great, and I really enjoyed this image. The Old Door received a score of 13 and a 3rd place. The image is by Jack Wong. I really like the textures and the Asian writing on the frame of the door. While it could be considered a little cliche because it's just a door, I thought that the open door and the fact that there is another red door within the frame makes it stand out a little bit more. I would have loved to see one more element. Perhaps someone is sitting outside of the door, or we are peeking inside at someone or something. That may have made it a little bit stronger, but I thought it was a fabulous image. Through the Looking Glass received a score of 14 and 2nd place. The image is by Stephanie Quinn. This image is wonderful. I love the mood and the color and the figure that is inside of the, quote, entrance. Reflections always make a great composition, or makes a composition more interesting because they help to add a sense of repetition. Overall, great image. Santorini's Summer Stairwell received a score of 15 and 1st place. The image is by Nancy Mack. This image really stood out the most because of its formal composition and color. I love that we don't see an entrance directly. It's more indirect, therefore a little more mysterious. I love the warm feel and the little tree that serves as a focal point. Intermediate. Welcome In received a score of 7. The use of the frontal flash and the candid style makes it seem too much like a snapshot. To improve, don't use the harsh frontal flash or flash at all if possible. Natural light has a little bit more of a nicer quality to it unless you really know how to use the flash. I would have changed the composition to either make it a portrait where the women are aware of the photographer, or I would have removed the women altogether and just made it about the entrance. Mauve Iris Portal received a score of 7. While flower images can be beautiful, they are the most cliche subject for beginning photographers. I like the idea of considering it an entrance, but it's hard to get past the fact that it's ultimately a flower picture. Perhaps cropping in even tighter would help so that the image becomes more abstract, and then we as viewers can see past the flower and we can see into the entrance, which is what the photographer was intending for this image. New Door Guy received a score of 8. The slanted composition doesn't really help. It may have been intentional, but there doesn't seem to be a good reason for it to be tilted, so it looks like a mistake. The colors are great, but I would have made the shot more formal and straight on so the viewer can concentrate on the message. Three Keys received a score of 8. The subject matter is interesting, but the long cropped format makes it seem too awkward. I would consider the rest of the composition, even if you have lots of negative space, over-cropping into a narrow rectangle, because it just makes it seem a little awkward. Cubistic Entrances, inspired by Picasso's, quote, Mediterranean landscape, received a score of 8. Unfortunately, this image is a bit too yellow. It makes it look unnatural. I like the idea that it's inspired by Picasso, but seeing the two little girls in the image makes them the focal point, and I feel like the photographer's too far away. I would have shot this as a vertical and moved in much closer because I like the interaction between the girls. If the image is more about the space, then I would have removed the girls altogether. Multi-Windows received a score of 10. This is another image that could have been great because of the composition, but it's just too over-processed. I would have cut back on the amount of post-processing on the computer. Doorway to the Mississippi received a score of 11. The clouds are great, but the light is too harsh, and again, it looks a little over-processed. Three Choices received a score of 13 and an honorable mention. The photographer is Valerie Johnson. I love the formal composition and the humor of the title, and the complementary colors work well together. Sorry I Couldn't Find the Entrance received a score of 13 and an honorable mention. Vincent Carroll is the photographer. I enjoy the humor of this image, the idea that the entrance is sort of there, but really it's missing. The texture really stood out as well. Locking of the Past received a score of 13 in third place. The photographer is Ming Yang. I like the double image that is repeated here. That's really nice. The tight crop is great. There were just a few images that stood out a bit more, but I really enjoyed this image with its unique cropping of just the door rings. Windows Above the Cafe received a score of 13 in second place. It's by Oscar Roldan. I love the formal composition and the repetition of the windows. While it's an image that I've seen before, it still has a timeless quality, and I love that only the tops of the umbrellas are visible. And the black and white works well as, also because it helps to enhance that texture. Labyrinth received a score of 14 in first place. The photographer is Robin de Ruin. I really like the abstract composition, just full of lines, but also I like the idea of an obstructed entrance. It really is like a labyrinth or a maze, and I also love the monochromatic tone. It just enhances the image. Advanced. Black Doorknob received a score of 7. This image has an awkward composition. You have the black doorknob on the upper half and then nothing below. I think I would rather have seen the entire door and gave it even more negative space. It just seems a little too in between as it is. Back Street of Obidos received a score of 7. This image has a great composition, but it's shot at the totally wrong time of day. Midday is usually not ideal. Maybe wait until the sun is setting so we can get some long shadows in there. Golden Gate received a score of 8. This image just seems a little dark and underexposed. I understand that it's a night photo, but it still could have used a little more exposure. Also, with it being a highly recognizable landmark, it's just a little bit too predictable. Side entrance received a score of 8. This space looks like it would be a great spot for a portrait. It just seems to be missing an element, and I wasn't sure why we're getting blur in the background. It just looks a little awkward with it being only in the trees. I would actually want to see those trees in focus. So maybe if it had been shot with a smaller aperture to include those trees in the depth of field, that might have made it nicer. Escalator to Old Town Toledo received a score of 9. This could have been a great image, but it looks a little flat, as in no contrast. There's also a weird white spot on the man coming down from the escalator. I'm not sure if that's due to sun flare since we're looking up into the light, but it just looks a little bit awkward there. St. George's Church, Thornton Howe, received a score of 12. I really like the composition of this image. The woman in the shot is great. The framing is too. However, the building looks a little bit light, which makes the entire image look strange. I would just darken that a bit. Enter at Your Own Risk received a score of 13 and an honorable mention. The photographer is Carol Barlow. This was a little humorous and terrifying at the same time. I really like the old barn with the haphazard window covers that look like they are on their last hinge. It's a great composition. The only thing I may have changed is the time of day. The grass along the bottom edge seems a little hot. The Entrance to a Better View received a score of 13 and an honorable mention. The photographer is Linfen Wong. This image has beautiful colors, and I really love the shadows. The composition did seem a little awkward at first with the two views, one looking down with the great shadows and then another looking out. It almost seemed like there were two photographs here, but the more I looked at it, the more I was intrigued. Hidden Entrance into Old Warehouse received a score of 14 in third place. The photographer is Jim Shannon. This is a great portrait. I love the environment and the way it seems to fit the personality of the model. There's great light, great color. I love the model, the fact that the model's on the ground as well in the lower angle of view. Entranced received a score of 14 and second place. The image is by Jim Walsh. I love the double meaning of the title. The space and the light are beautiful. This image just really stood out. The Gateway to a New Life received a score of 15 in first place. The photographer is James Edward. This is a beautiful portrait. It has nice soft light to complement the wedding dress and the femininity of the model. The contrast of the light and dark is great. The meaning of the title, Gateway to a New Life, it looks like she is coming from the darkness into the light, but I also love the warm light that's behind her. Masters. Entering the Digital Age received a 7. While I like the concept, it looks a little too much like a snapshot from a vacation. I think there needed to be some other element. I'm not sure what though, because I understand what the photographer is trying to do, but it just seemed too much like a snapshot. Mindy's Gate, Tampa, received a score of 7. I know it's a gate, but it doesn't seem to really be about an entrance without reading the title. I didn't see a gate when I did my first pass, so that was a little confusing. However, it is a very nice image. Highway Entrances received a score of 8. There's nothing really wrong with this image. I've just seen it way too many times, so it didn't stand out as being unique. When I assign the shutter speed assignment to my students, I always get this image, and that's really the only reason why it didn't get a higher score. Window in Window received a score of 8. I like the frame within a frame composition, but the lighting here is just too harsh. Nothing Here for Me received a score of 10. This is a cute image. I like the dog coming out of the door and the pose too. There were just some other images that stood out a little bit more. I'm not sure what the photographer could have done to improve here. Maybe the lighting to give it a little bit more. I don't know. There's really nothing wrong with this image. I think there were just other images that stood out a little bit more. Art Deco Foyer, Buenos Aires, received a score of 11. This is a good example of a formal composition, but the yellow cast really brought it down for me. I wish that there were that the image was white balanced instead. I think then the color would have stood out more. Masai Home Entrance received a score of 11. I think I've just seen too many images of African children looking this way. I wish that they could have been interacting more with the photographer. I also would have wanted to see the color of their dresses, but then again, I do like the texture of the trees as a black and white. The Back Gate received a score of 12. I like this timeless image. It's very simple. However, I do wish that some of these images had another element to them, like maybe making it into a portrait. For example, having the owner of the property posing at the gate. That might have been nice. Graffiti Passage received a score of 12. This image has great color. It's chaotic with all its graffiti, but it's also simple in a way. I wish that the people at the end were not there, or if they could have been a little closer, then it would have worked better. They're just at an awkward place right now. Chained received a score of 12. I like the angle of this shot and the distance to the subject. It makes the chains seem enormous. I also like the crosses on either side. The tone of it seems a little weird though. That was the only drawback. Escapes received a score of 13. This image has great color and the time of day works great because it forms the long shadows and it makes it a little bit more abstract. In the Mouth of the Tunnel received a score of 13 and an honorable mention. The image is by Sam Wilson. This image has great use of shadows that work well within the composition to make it more interesting and unique. I love the captured moment of the little boy just coming out of the tunnel. I thought it had great timing. View from Navajo Sheep Pen from Cave Canyon to Shelley received a score of 13 and an honorable mention. The photographer is Charlotte Hasty. This image has great color, and I love the complementary colors with the green tree that is framed. Actually, many of the photographers in this contest did a great job of using these types of natural frames, and I applaud you all for that. Who's There received a score of 14 and third place. The image is by John Lehman. I really liked this image. It has a narrative quality. It's very mysterious. I think maybe the dirty window makes it mysterious. I love the cowboy hat, and I also love the expression on the model's face. Woody's Home received a score of 14 and a second place. Don Champlin is the photographer. While I have seen many bird photographs, this one is executed so well that it merited a high score. Abandoned House received a score of 15 and first place. The photographer is Maria Downey. This image looks so surreal and dreamlike. It's just so unique. The composition is wonderful. The light coming in gives the sand a beautiful texture. I love the repetition of the door frame. We're looking into a doorway which forms a frame within another frame, and our eye is then satisfied with the focal point of a door off the hinges, and it's just spectacular. Overall, I think the work is remarkable. Most of the images, as you can see, were neck and neck as far as points are concerned. Everyone did a fantastic job. And I was especially impressed with the beginners. I thought that they did such great work. You know, being beginners, you would think that all the work might look a little more cliche or a little more like snapshots. But I thought overall, you did a great job. I would keep up the great work. I also would like to thank you all, to thank the Plano Photo Club for sharing your work with me. I had a lot of fun with the judging. As far as things you can do to improve, and this is just my opinion, as you know, judging is quite subjective. You know, my taste could have changed if I had viewed it on a different day, a different week. You just never know what tastes are going to be like. So my eye is very subjective. So I want you to keep that in mind. I think everyone did, again, remarkable. Things that you can do to improve just overall is looking for things that are more unique. Try to think of the theme in more abstract terms, but not too abstract, because then you could get away from the theme. Adding another element to things, like making things a portrait. I know some people did do portraits. Some of you, I thought, were missing portraits because you had such great locations. We just needed another focal point to focus on for some of you. Always look for great light. Always look for great color. Those are the things that you can just all do in order to improve and make your photographs stand out just a little bit more. But overall, I think everyone's work was remarkable. Thank you again. So the Best of Show Image Award goes to Abandoned House by Maria Downey.